Restaurant manager kicks out 82-year-old Korean War veteran. 6 Navy SEALs enter and silence everyone. When 82-year-old Harold Kim entered Mario's Italian restaurant with his worn veteran cap and old military jacket, restaurant manager Tony Castellano took one look at the elderly man's modest appearance and immediately assumed he couldn't afford their prices. What happened next would be captured on multiple phones and viewed by millions, because 6 young men in civilian clothes had just walked in for dinner, and they weren't ordinary customers. They were Navy SEALs on shore leave, and they were about to teach everyone in that restaurant what happens when you disrespect a Korean War hero. The Friday evening crowd at Mario's Italian restaurant buzzed with the energy of weekend plans and celebration dinners. The upscale establishment in downtown Chicago had built its reputation on authentic Italian cuisine and an atmosphere that attracted professionals, couples on date nights, and families celebrating special occasions. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and the aroma of garlic, basil, and fresh bread filled the dining room. Among the well-dressed clientele sat families sharing expensive bottles of wine, business executives discussing deals over appetizers, and young couples taking photos of their perfectly plated entrees. The restaurant's dress code was enforced selectively, generally favoring those who looked like they belonged in Chicago's financial district. Into this scene walked Harold Kim, an 82-year-old Korean War veteran who had spent the morning at the VA hospital receiving treatment for injuries that still plagued him 7 decades after his service ended. He wore his treasured possession, a faded Korea veteran cap that had seen better days, paired with an old military surplus jacket that was clean but obviously worn through years of careful use. Harold had been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. His granddaughter Sarah was graduating from Northwestern Medical School tomorrow, and he'd saved money from his modest pension to take her out for a celebration dinner at what she described as her favorite restaurant. Sarah was running late from her final exam, but Harold had arrived early, wanting to make sure everything was perfect for their special evening. As Harold approached the hostess stand, his walking cane clicking softly against the polished floor, restaurant manager Tony Castellano noticed the elderly man immediately. In Castellano's mind, Harold's appearance didn't match the establishment's clientele. The worn jacket, the aged veteran cap, and the careful way Harold moved suggested someone who might not be able to afford Mario's prices or understand their upscale atmosphere. Castellano had been managing Mario's for 8 years, and he prided himself on maintaining what he called standards. In his view, the restaurant's success depended on creating an exclusive atmosphere that attracted wealthy customers who spent generously and left substantial tips. Elderly customers, particularly those who dressed modestly, were generally bad for business in his estimation. "Excuse me, sir," Castellano said, intercepting Harold before he reached the hostess podium. His voice carried the practiced politeness of someone delivering unwelcome news. "I'm afraid we're completely booked this evening. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the diner down the street. Their prices are more reasonable." Harold paused, confused by the reception. He'd made a reservation specifically for this evening, confirming it twice to ensure everything would be ready for Sarah's celebration. "I have a reservation," Harold said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket for the confirmation he'd printed at home. Harold Kim, party of 2, 7 o'clock. Castellano barely glanced at the paper before shaking his head dismissively. "I don't see that name in our system, and frankly, sir, I'm not sure this restaurant is the right fit for someone in your circumstances. We have a certain clientele here, and I think you'd be happier somewhere more casual." The implication was clear and devastating. Harold felt the familiar burn of discrimination that he'd experienced throughout his life. From his childhood during World War II, when Japanese-American families were interned, through his service in Korea, where Asian-American soldiers faced skepticism from both enemies and some of their own countrymen, to moments like this when his appearance was judged before his character was known. "Sir, I understand you run an upscale establishment," Harold replied with the dignity that had carried him through 8 decades of challenges. "But I made this reservation to celebrate my granddaughter's medical school graduation. I can pay for our dinner, and I simply want to enjoy an evening with my family." Castellano's response was swift and public. delivered loud enough for nearby diners to overhear. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but we've had issues before with people who can't actually afford our prices ordering expensive items and then creating problems when the bill arrives. Our dinner entries start at $45, and that's before wine, appetizers, and desserts. I'm trying to save you embarrassment." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Harold felt every eye in the restaurant focus on him, transforming what should have been a proud grandfather's celebration into a public spectacle of humiliation. Several diners had pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening. "I can afford your prices," Harold said quietly, his voice still controlled despite the storm of emotions building inside him. "I'm a veteran. I've worked my entire life, and I saved money specifically for this dinner." Castellano's laugh was harsh and carried across the restaurant. "Sure you can. And I suppose you'll tell me next that you're some kind of war hero, right? Look, this isn't personal, but we need customers who actually spend money, not people who order soup and water and leave a dollar tip." The cruelty was breathtaking. Harold had never ordered soup and water in his life, had always tipped appropriately despite living on a fixed income, and had never created problems at any restaurant. But Castellano's assumptions had painted him as a stereotypical problematic elderly customer, and he was determined to remove what he saw as a potential disruption to his profitable evening. But what Castellano didn't know was that 6 young men had just entered the restaurant and taken seats at a corner table, having heard the entire exchange. They weren't business executives or young professionals despite their civilian clothes and quiet demeanor. They were United States Navy SEALs on 3-day shore leave, and they had just witnessed something that demanded immediate action. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson was the first to recognize what was happening. At 32, Thompson was the senior member of the SEAL team with 7 deployments and a Silver Star earned during classified operations he couldn't discuss outside his unit. As a Korean American from Los Angeles, whose own grandfather had served in the Korean War, Marcus understood the unique challenges faced by Asian American veterans who had served their country while facing discrimination at home. "You seeing this?" Thompson whispered to his teammate, Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez, a 29-year-old from Texas who had been a SEAL for 8 years. Rodriguez had deep respect for veterans of all eras, having been raised by a grandfather who served in Vietnam and faced similar treatment upon returning home. "That's a Korean War veteran getting disrespected by someone who's never served a day in his life," Rodriguez replied, his jaw tightening as he watched Castellano continue to humiliate Harold in front of the entire restaurant. The other 4 members of their team had also turned their attention to the hostess stand. Petty Officer First Class James Wilson, a 28-year-old from Michigan, was already reaching for his phone to document what was happening, understanding the power of social media to expose injustice. Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Martinez, a 26-year-old from California, was preparing to intervene, his sense of justice outweighing any concern about causing a scene. Petty Officer Second Class Robert Chen, a 25-year-old Chinese-American from Washington State, was watching with growing anger as an elderly Asian-American veteran was being treated like an unwanted burden. As someone who had faced his own share of discrimination throughout his military career, Chen recognized the pattern of assumptions and prejudice playing out before them. Petty Officer Third Class Kevin Washington, a 23-year-old from Georgia and the youngest of the group, was learning a valuable lesson about standing up for what's right, regardless of personal cost. The bonds of military brotherhood didn't recognize age, race, or era of service, and when one veteran was disrespected, they were all disrespected. Meanwhile, at the hostess stand, Castellano was escalating the situation further. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're making other customers uncomfortable, and this is disrupting our dining room. Perhaps the American Legion Hall would be more appropriate for someone like you." The final insult was delivered with casual cruelty. Harold felt his face burn with embarrassment as dozens of diners watched him being systematically humiliated. He could imagine Sarah arriving to find him gone, their special celebration ruined by assumptions about who he was supposed to be. Harold reached slowly into his wallet, pulling out several $20 bills, more than enough to cover an expensive dinner for 2. Would this be sufficient proof that I can pay for our meal? Castellano glanced at the money dismissively. Anyone can flash some cash. The question is whether you'll actually spend it appropriately or just order the cheapest items on the menu and complain about portion sizes. That was the final straw for Thompson. Military values weren't just words to him, they were principles that included honor, respect, and protection for those who had served before. When a veteran was being disrespected, it was every active duty service member's responsibility to act. "Excuse me," Thompson said, rising from his table with the fluid movement of someone trained for combat. His voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-and-death situations. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with this gentleman." Castellano looked over, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, this is a private conversation between myself and this customer. Please return to your table." Thompson smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Actually, it became our business the moment you started disrespecting a Korean War veteran. You see, I'm Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, United States Navy SEALs, and these are my teammates. We've been watching you humiliate a fellow service member, and we're not going to stand for it." As if responding to a silent command, the other 5 SEALs rose from their table and approached the hostess stand, forming a semicircle around the confrontation. They didn't make any threatening gestures, but their coordinated movement and obvious military bearing immediately changed the atmosphere in the restaurant. Castellano's confidence began to waver as he found himself facing 6 of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm just running my business. This man doesn't fit our demographic. I'm Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, United States Navy SEALs," Thompson replied, pulling out his military ID with the same crisp precision that Harold had displayed earlier. "These are my teammates. We're stationed at Naval Base San Diego, and we've been watching you treat a Korean War veteran like garbage when he deserves respect." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Petty Officer First Class David Rodriguez, SEAL Team 3. I'd like to take a look at this gentleman's military service record because I think you might be surprised by what you find." Harold looked up at the young SEALs surrounding him, his eyes filling with tears of gratitude. In his 82 years, he'd rarely experienced such immediate and unconditional support from strangers. "Sir, what's your name and service history?" Thompson asked respectfully. "Harold Kim, retired," Harold replied, his voice stronger now. "I served with the 2nd Infantry Division during the Korean War. 3 years, 1951 to 1954. What battles did you participate in, sir?" Wilson asked, his tone reverent. "Heartbreak Ridge, Pork Chop Hill," Harold said quietly. "Lost a lot of good soldiers in those fights, but we held the line and helped preserve freedom in South Korea." The words hit the SEALs like a physical force. The battles Harold mentioned were among the bloodiest and most crucial engagements of the Korean War, fought under conditions of extreme hardship and danger. "Sir, would you be willing to show us your military documents?" Thompson asked, though the reverence in his voice made it clear he already believed every word. Harold nodded and carefully reached into his wallet, pulling out a worn leather folder that contained his discharge papers, Bronze Star citation and Korean War service medals. He opened it slowly, revealing documents that told the story of a young man who had answered his country's call during one of its most challenging conflicts. Thompson took the documents with the same reverence he would show to sacred texts. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant, "this is Korean War veteran Harold Kim. He served with the 2nd Infantry Division from 1951 to 1954, participating in some of the most crucial battles in that conflict. He earned a Bronze Star for valor in combat and a Purple Heart for wounds received in action against enemy forces." The restaurant erupted. Every conversation stopped as diners absorbed what they were hearing. Several people began applauding, others were openly wiping away tears. The 6 SEALs snapped to attention and rendered a perfect military salute to Harold, who slowly stood and returned it with the precision that 7 decades hadn't erased. "This man," Thompson continued, "helped preserve freedom and democracy in South Korea. He risked his life in combat when he was barely 20 years old, fighting battles that determined the outcome of the war. He is a hero, and he deserves to be treated as such." Martinez pulled out his phone and began scrolling through military database. Harold Kim, 2nd Infantry Division, Korean War veteran, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. This man is a verified American hero who served with distinction during one of our nation's most challenging conflicts. Castellano stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He had just humiliated one of America's bravest, a soldier who had risked his life for his country when Castellano wasn't even born. But the SEALs weren't finished with their lesson. Chen stepped forward to address the entire restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what a real American hero looks like. Someone who answered his country's call when he was barely out of high school and fought in battles that preserved freedom itself. Washington pulled out his phone, which had been recording the entire confrontation. "Sir," he said to the restaurant owner who had emerged from the kitchen, "I want to give you a chance to make this right. This Korean War veteran was just insulted and humiliated by your manager for no reason other than his age and appearance." The owner, seeing 6 SEALs in a restaurant full of angry customers, immediately moved to remedy the situation. "Sir," he said to Harold, "your dinner tonight is completely on the house, and you have my personal guarantee that this will never happen again. Miss Castellano, you're suspended pending investigation." But Thompson wasn't finished. He turned to Castellano, who was now visibly shaking. "Son, I want you to understand something. When you disrespect a veteran, you disrespect everyone who has ever served this country. This man earned the right to eat anywhere he wants, and he should never have to prove that to anyone." Rodriguez approached Harold with his phone. "Sir, would you be willing to take a photo with us? We'd like to post it to show the world what real military brotherhood looks like across generations." Harold nodded, unable to speak. The 6 SEALs arranged themselves around him, and several customers volunteered to take pictures. The images would later go viral, showing 6 elite warriors honoring an elderly veteran and demonstrating the bonds that connected all who had served. But this story was far from over. What happened next would change not just Harold's evening, but the entire way the restaurant treated veterans. Just as the SEALs were finishing their photos with Harold, the restaurant door opened and a young woman in medical scrubs rushed in, looking around frantically. "Grandpa?" Sarah Kim called out, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The exam ran longer than expected, but I couldn't wait to celebrate with you." She stopped short when she saw her grandfather surrounded by 6 young men in military bearing, with dozens of customers watching and cameras recording. "Grandpa? What's happening?" Harold's face lit up with pride as he turned to his granddaughter. "Sarah, I want you to meet some new friends. They're Navy SEALs, and they just taught everyone here about respect for veterans." Thompson stepped forward and extended his hand to Sarah. "Ma'am, your grandfather is an American hero. He served with incredible distinction during the Korean War, and we wanted to make sure everyone in this restaurant understands what an honor it is to be in his presence." Sarah looked around the restaurant, taking in the scene, the apologetic owner, the suspended manager, the applauding customers, and the 6 elite warriors who had defended her grandfather's honor. Tears filled her eyes as she realized what had transpired. "Grandpa fought at Heartbreak Ridge and Porkchop Hill," Sarah said proudly, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "He came home with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart, but more importantly, he came home with stories of brothers who didn't make it. He's been my hero my entire life." Rodriguez nodded respectfully. "Ma'am, he's our hero too. What happened here tonight was unacceptable, but your grandfather handled it with the same dignity and grace that got him through combat. He's an inspiration to all of us." As the crowd began to settle down, Thompson approached Harold one more time. "Sir, here's my contact information. If you ever face this kind of disrespect again, you call me. The military takes care of its own, and that includes veterans from every war and every generation." One by one, the other SEALs offered their contact information to Harold. They made it clear that he had their support, and the support of the entire military community. "You're not alone, sir," Wilson told Harold. "What happened here tonight was wrong, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." But Harold and Sarah's evening was just beginning to improve. Word of the confrontation had spread through social media as other customers posted videos and photos. Within an hour, The restaurant had received dozens of calls from veterans organizations, military families, and civilians who wanted to show their support. The video of the confrontation would be viewed over 8 million times in the first week alone. It sparked nationwide conversations about the treatment of elderly veterans and led to policy changes at restaurants and businesses across the country. Castellano was terminated from his position and found it difficult to find similar work after the video went viral. Mario's restaurant implemented new training programs to ensure all staff understood the importance of treating veterans with respect. They declared Harold a VIP customer for life and established a monthly dinner honoring local veterans. Most importantly, Harold never again felt ashamed or embarrassed about his service. The 6 SEALs had not only defended his honor but had welcomed him into their brotherhood. They visited him regularly, included him in military ceremonies, and made sure he knew that his service would never be forgotten. Months later, Harold would speak at military events, sharing his story and inspiring younger veterans. The restaurant confrontation had made him famous, but more importantly, it had reminded the world that heroes come in all ages and that respect for those who served should never depend on their appearance or circumstance. The 6 SEALs had taught everyone in Mario's restaurant a valuable lesson that night. Military brotherhood transcends generations, branches of service, and ethnic backgrounds. When one veteran is disrespected, the entire military feels. They had shown that true strength isn't about dominating others, but about protecting those who have already given everything for their country. Harold Kim had helped preserve freedom in Korea 70 years earlier, contributing to a victory that protected millions of people from tyranny. But on that Friday night at Mario's restaurant, 6 Navy SEALs had saved something equally important: his dignity, his honor, and his faith in the brotherhood that had sustained him through 8 decades of life. Sarah's graduation dinner became a celebration not just of her achievement, but of her grandfather's service and the respect he deserved. The restaurant, now understanding who they were serving, provided them with the finest table, the best service, and a meal they would remember for the rest of their lives. The confrontation had lasted less than an hour, but its impact would be felt for years to come. It was a reminder that respect must be earned through understanding, that service should be honored regardless of age, and that sometimes it takes warriors to defend warriors. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson of that night echoed through the military community and beyond. 6 Navy SEALs had shown the world what military brotherhood really meant, reminding everyone that heroes deserve respect throughout their entire lives, not just during their years of active service. Harold and Sarah finished their celebration dinner surrounded by new friends and the knowledge that his service had been publicly honored. As they prepared to leave, Harold turned to the 6 SEALs who had changed his evening and perhaps his life. "Thank you," he said simply, "not just for tonight, but for your service. You reminded an old soldier that the brotherhood never ends." Thompson smiled and saluted one final time. "Sir, thank you for paving the way for all of us. Your service made ours possible, and we'll never forget that." Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with courage, conviction, and the willingness to stand up for what's right. On that night at Mario's restaurant, 6 SEALs fought and won a battle for respect, dignity, and the recognition that heroes deserve honor throughout their entire lives. If this story moved you, remember to honor the veterans in your community. Subscribe for more stories of courage and respect, and share this reminder that real heroes come in all ages and deserve recognition for their sacrifice.